Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Number two, Ohio State heading on the road to play number three, Oregon, in what I think might be the biggest regular season game that we'll see across college football in 2024. Now, we've done our preview prediction episode for this football game, but since this game is so big, want to take a little bit of a deeper dive, get into the weeds a little bit in terms of how these two teams match up against one another. We're going to start from an Oregon perspective, talk about a pathway to victory, talk about the things that Oregon can do to potentially give this Ohio State team some problems. Now, I think you got to start with this that, game planning, trying to find a weakness within this Ohio State team, it ain't that easy. Like, we're talking about my Michigan Wolverines and we're game planning against Michigan. We could probably go 90 minutes in terms of things you can do to give Michigan some problems. It's not the same with Ohio State. This is a very complete roster with not a lot of holes within this team. That being said, there are some things that I think Oregon can do to give Ohio State some problems. We're going to get into that now. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And I think more importantly, whether you're an Oregon fan, whether you're an Ohio State fan, would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. If you're an Ohio State fan, you disagree with some of my takes, I would love to hear from you. And if you're an Oregon fan, I know you've been prepping for this Ohio State game as well. So let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with how Oregon can potentially heat up Will Howard. And why I think this is such a big storyline in this football game is, Will Howard hasn't been under a ton of pressure to start 2024. I think that has to do with the teams that they've played. They haven't really played a defensive front that really contest this Ohio State offensive line. I think the biggest difference between this Oregon team from 2023 and what you're seeing in 2024 is, I think Oregon on the defensive line, has legitimate difference makers. You talk about how Jordan Burch is playing. You talk about Derek Harmon coming over from Michigan State. This will be by far the best defensive line that Ohio State has played. Now, why I wanted to start with this kind of talking point, if you will, is you look at the numbers of Will Howard, and although it's a small sample size, right, he hasn't been under pressure all that much in 2024 based on the teams that they've played. When he has been under pressure, he hasn't been that good. And quite frankly, this is a stat that goes back to his time at Kansas State as well. When Will Howard is put off his spot, when there's a little bit of pressure in that pocket, that's when you see Will Howard make some mistakes. That's when you see him get erratic with his accuracy. Can Oregon do that is one of the biggest storylines. You look at the small sample size from Will Howard under pressure. He's only been under pressure 21 of his dropbacks in 2024. But when he is under pressure, he's 5 of 16 for only 34 yards. His PFF passing grade is at a 25 and a half. It's pretty clear that Will Howard so far in 2024, and again, going back to his time at Kansas State, when he's under pressure, he's not as good of a quarterback. This is an Oregon defensive line that will be by far Ohio State's biggest test in terms of pass protection. How can Oregon manufacture some pressure on Will Howard? Now, I think it's easier said than done, right? Ohio State in their rushing attack, it kind of keeps a lot of the pass rush at bay. And so that's something Ohio State has really leaned on in terms of, helping Will Howard have clean pockets. But I think, secondly, I think the conversation is how do you get pressure on Will Howard? And I think a lot of Ohio State fans would probably agree with this take. It's probably going to come from the right side of the offensive line. You look at Josh Simmons at left tackle, you look at Donovan at the left guard spot, even Seth McLaughlin at center. That's been a really solid unit for Ohio State, specifically in pass protection. I don't think a lot of Ohio State fans are too concerned about the left side of the offensive line. But what I think Ohio State fans might be concerned about is the right side of the offensive line. You look at Tegra, Shabola at the guard spot, and Josh Fryer at right tackle. That's a question mark for this Ohio State team that goes back to the offseason and even back into the 2023 season. And so if you're Oregon, that's probably the side of the offensive line that you want to test. And whether that's some overload pressure to that right side, whether it's lining up Jordan Burch, Derek Harmon on that right side, using some of your best pass rushers to get after what I think might be the weak part of this Ohio State offensive line, that's what you're looking at. And again, you look at Oregon and say this pass rush, it's a hell of a lot different from what we've seen in the 2023 season, where you had some solid pass rushers, but I don't think you had any game wreckers. I mean, Derek Carmen, I think, has been arguably one of the better interior defensive line pass rushers that we've seen in all of college football. The stats certainly back it up: 20 quarterback hurries, a 20% pass rush win rate. You look at Jordan Birch, 15 quarterback hurries, a 15% pass rush win rate. You're seeing some of the young edge rushers, guys like Mateo Yu and Tatum, kind of take that next step. If you played this game in 2023, I think one of my big question marks is, does Oregon have the firepower to really get after Ohio State in the pass rush? I think they might in 2024. And especially having this game be in Autzen Stadium where this crowd is going to be loud, specifically on third downs, the snap count might be a little bit hard to hear. I think you want to test this right side of the offensive line. So I think that's where it starts, because Will Howard clearly not as good of a passer when he's under pressure. I think number two, you look at this Ohio State passing attack, and I think it's a given. Like, Oregon has to do something to stop the run. This is an Ohio State rushing attack that is extremely dynamic, with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, what I think are two of the better backs in the country. But more importantly, Ohio State runs such a I love the rushing attack. They run it in so many different ways, whether it's some outside zone, whether it's some gap stuff. They run it a lot of different ways. They got two really, really good tailbacks. Stopping the run is kind of a given. I don't think that's any groundbreaking analysis on my part. You look at the Ohio State passing attack and say they've built this offense around Will Howard. I think Ohio State fans would be the first to admit you don't have CJ Stroud or Justin Fields in the backfield here throwing the football. So how has Ohio State manufactured this passing attack so far? It's been a lot of short, intermediate type stuff. When you look at Will Howard's numbers, only 11 attempts going 20 plus yards down the field. His average depth of target sitting at 7.5 yards. Ohio State's not asking Will Howard to push the football down the field on a regular basis. This Ohio State passing attack is much more predicated on that short intermediate passing attack and getting their playmakers the ball in space and letting them operate after the catch. So if you're Oregon, one, I think you have a secondary that there's not many secondaries that I think can match up with Ohio State. I think Oregon might be one of them, headlined by Jabbar Muhammad. Brandon Johnson's played excellent at that nickel. That's probably a matchup you're looking at, right? Jabbar Muhammad dealing with Jeremiah Smith on the boundary. And then Brandon Johnson, who I think's played exceptional at that nickel spot, dealing with the Mekabuka in the slot. That, talk about a key matchup in that football game. Those two key matchups are huge. I mean, Ohio State has run their passing attack through Mekabuka and Jeremiah Smith. I think more importantly, you got to be aggressive with your coverage. Like, Ohio State wants to get the ball out quick. They want to utilize where Will Howard's at his best with the short intermediate passing attack. And you don't want to let a Mecca and Jeremiah Smith get the football in space. These passing attacks, actually, Oregon and Ohio State are very similar. I mean, it's predicated on rhythm, timing, and getting your playmakers the football in space. If you're Oregon, you want to test these wide receivers at the line of scrimmage. You don't want to give them a lot of space to operate after the catch. And if Will Howard beats you attacking that deeper third, I think you can live with that. But I think going into this football game, you want to make Will Howard go out and make some of those big time throws, specifically attacking that deeper third, because we haven't seen him do it all that much to start 2024. And again, historically, Will Howard's not the best passer pushing the ball down the field and making some of those high level throws. I think those are the two things. I kind of adding a few things in. Will Howard's legs will probably be more involved in this football game. I think this goes for both teams. They've been prepping for this game going back to fall camp. You will see things from Ohio State and Oregon that you haven't seen all year. There's zero doubt in my mind both Ryan Day and Dan Lanning have been looking at this game, installing some plays and packages and schemes that they haven't showed on film yet, that they're fully intending to put on the film, put on the football field, I should say, in this football game. So you will see some things that Ohio State and Oregon go to that you haven't seen yet. I think Will Howard's legs will certainly be a talking point in this one. But if you can take away that short intermediate passing game, not allow these wide receivers to have space after the catch, over half of Ohio State's receiving yards have been after the catch in 2024. I think that's what you could maybe do to give Ohio State some problems. Now, going into the defensive side of the football, I think it's Oregon's offense against this Ohio State defense. You want to start with this. This Ohio State defense, I think, for my money, might be the best defense in the country. Not only from a talent standpoint, but I think more importantly, like how they've played. You take a look. I mean, scoring defense, they are the number one team in the country. I think that matches up with the talent that they have. The biggest storyline in this football game is Oregon staying efficient on first and second down for a couple of different reasons. One, this Oregon offense, when they got behind the chains early in the 2024 season against teams like Idaho and Boise State, that's clearly where this Oregon team struggles, right? Will Stein wants to be on schedule. He wants to have his whole playbook open to him on all three downs. The first two games of the season, you saw Oregon get behind the chains and really struggle on offense to find their rhythm. They've been doing a much better job of that the last three games. And then you look at the matchup against Ohio State and say you don't want to be in third and long against this Ohio State defense, because that's when Jim Knowles really gets in his bag. He starts dialing up a lot of exotic pass rushes and kind of blitz packages. But I think more importantly, like, you're dealing with some really, really big time edge rushers. I think led by Jack Sawyer, who has really emerged going into year four as I think one of the better pass rushers that we see in the country. You don't want to be in third and long against this Ohio State team. Now, I'm not saying you have to run the football 70% of the time, but you do want to run the football to keep this offense on schedule. And quite, it's a hard defense to run the football against. I don't see Oregon running the football for over 200 yards in this game, but if you can consistently find yourself in, second and sevens, third and threes, moving the chains, that's kind of where you want to be with Oregon. I think the last thing you want to talk about is you got to be able to hit the explosive plays when they're there. If there's been one maybe flaw of Ohio State over the last couple of years under Jim Knowles, they're going to be aggressive. They're going to turn the football over. They're going to make some negative plays. But because they're so aggressive, they have given up some big plays. I think most notably in a couple games against Michigan over the last couple of years. If you're Oregon, you're probably going to get some opportunities to really hit some explosive plays. When those opportunities are there, you have to make those plays. And again, I think that's kind of a given. I think this is what this game comes down to. Like, both teams will have opportunities to hit some big plays. If you want to win this football game, you got to show up in the big moments. I believe that Oregon will have some opportunities for guys like Evan Stewart attacking that deeper third to make some plays. When those throws are there, Dylan Gabriel's got to make them. And Dylan, you've seen a little inconsistency in terms of pushing the ball down the field. There have been some plays, I should say, that Dylan Gabriel has had the opportunity to make that he hasn't made to start the season. This will be a game that Dylan Gabriel, when you have those opportunities, I think you got to make those plays. So those are kind of the four things that I'm looking at in this football game. Again, we're going to run this one back the same exact way, but from an Ohio State point of view. From an Ohio State fan, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. From an Oregon fan, absolutely would love to hear. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Going to be, I think, one of the best games that we're going to see all year. But I think more importantly, I don't think this will be the last iteration of this football game either. Whether it's in the Big Ten championship, whether it's in the college football playoffs, would not be surprised if we see this game more than once in the 2024 season. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.